This is one of my favorite news stories, and I've used it before. About 10 years ago, there's a couple that bought a house, an old house, a fixer-upper house in Cleveland, Ohio, and they decided, to start renovating. They renovated the upstairs, and around 2016, they got to renovating the basement. And when they went into the basement, they discovered, maybe you can make it out here, an old suitcase that was hidden up in the ceiling between the joists. And the suitcase, when they opened it up, had $23,000 of cash in it. Now, what would you do if that happened to you? You can imagine that with this couple, with this discovery came a cascade of feelings. That first there would be confusion. What is this suitcase? Why is it stored, hidden in the basement? And then it would then change to excitement as they opened it. Look at all of this money. Look at this treasure. This is wonderful. And that would be short-lived, because then fear would then fall upon them, and they'd think, is this mafia money? Is a gangster going to show up at our front door asking for this money back? But then eventually, there would be a hope or some dreaming that fell upon them. What could we do with this discovery? What could we do with this treasure? How might this treasure change our lives? That's what's happening in today's scripture passage. We're talking about King Josiah, but a few kings before, let's say about 50 years before King Josiah, was King Manasseh. And he was known as, he's remembered in the annals of Israel's history as not being a really good king. He was powerful, he ruled, but he was not a good king because he abandoned the faith. He is the one who allowed the use of the temple to be compromised. He started worshiping other gods. And imagine if you were the priest in the temple, one of the head priest, and you see what's unfolding religiously and politically, thinking, my days are numbered, this is not going to go well. And so, about that time, let's say maybe around 675 BC, a priest took scrolls of the book of Deuteronomy and found some crevice or behind some wall or beneath some tile in the floor and hid away this sacred book just in case things were destroyed in the temple. Well, let a few years go by and you have King Josiah, and one day he realizes that he needs to transform. He needs to get back to basics, to restore temple worship. And so he releases a whole bunch of money. He instructs his treasurer and secretary to melt down gold and silver and give it to the construction people and not even ask for receipts. Just go in and fix up the temple. And while they're doing that, they discover this hidden scroll, this hidden book of the law, as it's called. And The priest of the day reads it to the politician of the day. The politician realizes, ooh, this is serious stuff. So that secretary reads it to the king, and the king is so distressed he rips his clothes because he realizes how far the nation has deviated from the covenant that it made with Yahweh. You can imagine that the discovery of this book would have triggered a cascade of feelings for King Josiah. First, confusion. What's this book? What's this thing being read to me? What does this mean? And then that would be followed by some excitement. This is something important. This is a long-lost document that describes our relationship, our covenant with God. What a great discovery. And then that excitement would be short-lived. And the clothes get torn by the king because now there's fear. What have we done? What have we not done? How have we not been faithful to God? What will befall us because of our disobedience? But eventually, the king has some hope. The king realizes this is a path forward. I'm going to gather everyone in our kingdom, everyone, big and small, and everyone's going to hear this treasure together. The king stood by the pillar, made a covenant before the Lord to follow the Lord with all his heart and all his soul, and all the people joined in the covenant. This is a story of reformation. It's a story of renewal. It's a story of cleaning up a mess, the temple, and discovering something that you've forgotten, and then finding a path forward. It's a template for our lives. How do we, every now and again, unclutter our lives? In our day, we talk about ourselves as followers of Jesus Christ as being temples of God. And so just like the temple in the story we read, our temple, our lives, maybe they fall out of proper use, they get cluttered up. You know the million things that distract you from what's most important in life. Every now and again, it's important to unclutter our lives so that we can renew our commitment to God. I mean, Christmas is coming up. Christmas, the second highest, maybe third highest holy day, don't want to get into a liturgical argument, of the year, and very cluttered. Cluttered by consumerism. We know every year this is when we have to strip down the unnecessary stuff and just focus on what does it mean to have this Christ child come into our world and into our lives. How do you do that? How do you unclutter your life so that you can renew your faith? Well, I'm going to describe something that may seem counterintuitive to you by telling you this story. Back in 1995, the people in charge of Yellowstone National Park realized that the ecosphere wasn't doing what it should, and someone came up with a good idea. We need to reintroduce wolves into Yellowstone Park. And when they did that, here's what happened. When the wolves were brought back to the park, they not only killed elk, but also changed their preys, the elk's behavior patterns. The herbivores started to avoid areas like valleys and gorges where they could be easily hunted by predators, and as a result, those areas began to regenerate. And species such as birds, beavers, mice, and bears returned. Plant life once again thrived along the riverbanks, and erosion decreased significantly. The stabilization of the riverbanks actually made the rivers and the streams change their course. With the reintroduction of just a small population of wolves, the landscape of the whole park transformed. What in the world is our minister telling us to do? I'm telling you to reintroduce some wolves. And what do I mean by that? I mean renewal of our faith, renewal of our commitment, our covenant with God to follow Jesus Christ isn't just some, well, let me think differently, let me remind myself of some ideas. It means reintroducing some risk into our relationship with God. It involves reintroducing some risk. What happened in the park was what they call a trophic cascade effect, because they reintroduced some risk into the park. Renewing our following of Jesus Christ, it's the same thing. What's it mean when I say reintroduce some risk? It means that the course of our faith can be transformed or renewed by doing something very risky, imitating Christ. It's an easy thing to say, a very risky thing to do. Imitating Christ means taking the same kinds of risks that Jesus took. Risks of feeding the hungry. Risks of helping those who are in poverty. Taking risks to change the lives of those who are homeless. Taking risks of standing up and saying uncomfortable things in the face of injustice. Those are risks. By reintroducing those risks into our lives, there will be a trophic cascade effect. Very naturally, the riverbanks of the course of our lives will slowly change. We're heading into the Christmas season where we'll hear the poetic words that the crooked paths are made straight. When we introduce risk, the risk of imitating Jesus Christ into our lives, our path in life will change, just naturally. Let me end with a very disturbing story that came out earlier this year. Just to remind us of how maybe we are kind of in the era of King Josiah, where the temple has fallen into misuse and disrepair. This is an NPR, an American story about Russell Moore, who was a top church official in the Southern Baptist Union. And he told this story in the interview. He'd say, multiple pastors would tell me essentially the same story about quoting the Sermon on the Mount. You remember the Sermon on the Mount? Blessed are the poor, blessed are the meek, blessed are the weak. They tell me the same story about quoting the Sermon on the Mount, parenthetically, in their preaching, turn the other cheek. You know, another risky thing to do when following Jesus. And then these pastors would tell the story that after they would preach those sermons about what Jesus said and what Jesus did, parishioners would come up to the pastor afterwards and say, "Where'd you get those liberal talking points?" And Moore goes on to say, what was alarming to me is that in most of these scenarios, when the pastor would say, I'm literally quoting Jesus Christ, the response from the parishioner wouldn't be, "Oh, sorry, my bad, you're quoting Jesus." The response instead would be, yeah. But that doesn't work anymore. That's weak. That Jesus is weak, and that doesn't work anymore. The risk when it's taken out of Christianity, the risk of imitating Christ when it's taken out of Christianity, kills the faith. What does it mean for us to renew our faith? What does it mean to introduce the risk in our lives of following, imitating Jesus Christ? It doesn't have to be rocket science. Like this week coming up, there's going to be a dozen opportunities for each and every one of us to take a risk and do something that Jesus would do.